Richard, thank you for joining us today on the Communicative Leader. And I know that you have over 40 years of experience and you've seen countless projects on the brink of collapse. So I'm wondering, when you walk into a troubled project for the first time, what are some of those common or the most common communication symptoms that tells you a project has lost its true north?
Well, again, Dr. O, thank you for letting me be here today. Appreciate it. And that's an excellent question, because when I walk into a client for the first time who says, "We have a problem, could you come in and help us?" The first thing I look for is, what am I being told by the people that are bringing me in versus the people that are actually working the project?
Yeah.
Am I hearing the same things for the most part? Or am I hearing one thing here and another thing here, and I don't see a thread, and I'm going, aha, okay, so they think this, they think this. Look at this chasm. We have to close it.
Yeah. I bet that's fascinating at times to hear
It
completely
is.
different stories. Yeah.
It is,
So
especially when you
let's,
have to
yeah,
tell the other parties, well, that's not what I'm hearing.
yeah. And so, let's keep pulling on that thread. And so I think part of this is that weak alignment that you're seeing as a major cause of project failure. Richard, I'm wondering, in your experience, where does that alignment usually break down? Is it kind of in the C suite, or is it the team on the ground trying to figure out the how?
The area that I say things break down, it's an intersection of people, process, and discipline. That's where the communication breakdown, the functions break down. You got to look for that intersection point, what's going on. So I look at the people. Do the people on the project have a clear definition of what they need to accomplish? And do they have the roles, responsibilities, and authority to do that? And is that abundantly clear to them why they're working what they're working on? And then I look at the process. Is the process, was it planned properly? Are they using the right approach to the project? How well do they scope that project? Because if you don't scope it right up front, you're just going to get junk all the way through. And then it's the discipline. Okay, you've got a good plan. The people know what they should be doing, but it's still not clicking. And
Hmm.
then I look at, well, there's a deviation from, there's a discipline issue here. Something's deviating. What is
Okay.
deviating and why? And C-suite is complicit to that. The team's complicit to that. You can't just say, well, it's them versus us. No, you're all in this together.
Yep.
Okay. And it's incumbent upon you to work together to fix it.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that intersection, because I think a lot of times we hear about people and process, or process and discipline, but it really is that, like you said, that intersection where we're seeing all of these themes being intertwined in a way that if they're not, we're not going to get very far.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely. That intersection is critical. You
yeah,
have to be,
yeah.
anybody who wants to recover a project needs to find that intersection.
Mm. And start with it too, right?
Yes. You have to start with that.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to go. And once you get done walking in here, and what,
Hmm.
you're hearing from the leaders versus the workers,
Hmm.
that starts pointing you towards the intersection.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. So when I was getting ready for our conversation, I was looking into your work and your approach, and I love that you're known for direct, collaborative, no nonsense style. And I'm wondering, in your experience, so you probably see a lot of professional politeness and a lot of kind of dancing around hard truths. But I'm wondering, tell me why you see that as one of the most dangerous things a leader can do, especially during that planning phase.
Well, during the planning phase, you're looking at many things, whether you're looking at agile project management or waterfall or traditional. You're going to look at the scope of the project, right? And so you got to make sure it's scoped right. And then you got to worry about the money, the budget, and then you got to worry about the schedule. And when most projects begin, or a majority of them, they'll be given a scope. We only have X amount of money and X amount of resources. So you got to plan around that. So when you're planning, if there's a disconnect between how much money or budget they want to give you versus what the team says it needs or resources, at that point, that needs to come to your leadership right away. Dr. Rowe, you want me to do this for a 500,000, but the team says they need 750,000. And here's the facts behind that. We don't think we can pull this off unless you wanted to scope it a bit. Then, yeah,
Mhm.
that's the possibility. But, if you don't face that truth, and it's not just
Mhm.
scope, but it's schedule, it's budget, it's
Yeah.
risk, it's research. If you don't get that right up front, you're just fooling yourself, and you're going to get very angry leadership once that thing starts running, the project starts running, because you're going to fail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just thinking too, that's even with like basic goal setting, right? At the beginning of every semester, I write how many pubs I want to have out and all of these other goals. And early on, I mean, that was a long list. And then with time and reflection and more accuracy, you recognize how to adjust that scope so you're set
Right.
up to be successful.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so let's keep talking about scope. And I know that one thing that you found is some of the biggest drains on a project is scope creep. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how can a leader refine their communication, be really intentional about it, those boundaries of what a project is? And I think more importantly, sometimes what it is not. Like, how do they do that in a way that's going to set them and their teams up for success?
I agree. And basically, the word intentional is key with what you said. Scope is intentional. If you come to me and ask me to do something, you have a reason why, and you know what the benefit should be. So we're going to figure that out up front, so that when I scope it, your expectations and the client's expectations, if the client's beyond you, we know what that is. I've developed a document that I use with my clients called a project scope statement. And in that statement, we first start, well, what is in scope and why? And then what is not in scope and why is that not in scope? But we go beyond that. So you're going to tell me you want these things in scope. Okay, so can you tell me your assumptions and your constraints about why that has to be in scope? I want to know exactly what's driving your thought train. And then once I understand that from you, I'm going to say, okay, there are some inherent risks that may affect what you want in scope. Let's talk about what you believe those risks to be. I'll identify more as I plan the project, but what do you feel the risks
Hmm.
are as to why you need this in scope?
Yeah.
And then we're going to wrap that up. We're going to put it down on a piece of paper and we're going to sign it. You say, Rich, why are you going to sign it?
Yeah.
Well, because of this. If we negotiate a scope of work, that's a living document. That can only change by a formal change control process, which we will have to agree upon,
Yeah.
which will be in that scope document. But if I sign it and you sign it, now we're calibrated. I say, Dr. O, I
Hmm.
fully understand. I know
Yeah.
now what you're asking me to do for the mission.
Hmm.
And you say, Rich, I've given you everything you need to know from me for the mission. That
Hmm.
document lives throughout the whole project. We're going to pull that out at every project review or stage gate review to say, Dr. Rowe and team, are we still calibrated on this scope? And
Hmm.
you're going to say, Richard, we are.
Yeah.
But that's how we're going to start every meeting
Yeah.
to make sure we are calibrated. And I do the same thing with
Uh-huh.
the project management plan. I make the team sign it. I make the leadership sign it so that we're calibrated.
Yeah, I really love that and love that it's a promise, right? Because it's funny when a lot of times when I think about creep, I think about job creep. That's what, like in my research and teaching and writing. And I hadn't thought about it in terms of scope creep in a project. But I was thinking when you were talking, that's the same thing with the job. We sign up for a job, we sign paperwork, we agree to a set of duties, and then we have to renegotiate that sometimes when it changes in ways.
Yes.
So I just think then you've got engagement when you're having people sign it. You have that commitment and consistency. Brilliant. Brilliant. I love that.
And it does one more thing. It's called the
Yeah.
definition of success. We've
Okay.
now
Yeah.
defined what success looks like.
Yep.
So you can rate me and my performance
Mm-hmm.
against that criteria. Have I successfully met your expectations and delivered what you wanted on budget on time?
Yeah, 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 that is beautiful. So let's continue. So this idea of holistic thinking and planning, I know you do a lot of holistic audits to pinpoint bottlenecks. So I'm wondering, how can a leader maintain kind of this still relational or warm presence when they're delivering a difficult audit report that especially can identify some things about teams that we don't like to hear, maybe dysfunction, things that we know, but a lot of times we don't name them.
Right. Well, team dysfunction is also a big part of project failure. And, in my experience, it's been because there's been a lack of understanding of roles, responsibilities, authorities. And yes, they get confused on scope or the teams wants to deviate. Look, we know we have a plan, but let's just modify this just a little bit. We'll get this extra stuff.
Yep.
It'll go quicker.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's not what we're being asked to do. That may be good for the second generation of what we're trying to develop, but let's stay focused on this generation. But when you're in a team dysfunction scenario, and I just came off one last summer where the teams were at odds with one another. This was a major producer of building and construction materials. They were at odds with one another about how the project should be run, and the team started to break down. And I wouldn't call it fight, but you could feel the tension between
Yeah.
the people about, I'm not agreeing with you on that. I want to go do
Uh-huh.
this for this quality thing. And that, so you have to first, my plan is I bring the
Mhm.
people together and say, there's tension here, there's dysfunction.
Yeah.
Let's be candid, honest, and respectful. Let's get it all
Mhm.
out on the table. What
Mhm.
is it that the team is not doing as a team and why? No names, no finger
Yeah.
pointing. Let's just talk about the issue. And then let's talk about everybody's idea of how to fix this issue because we're all in this soup together. And when you have to take a message like that up the rung, you have to deal with the facts and you have to impress upon the leadership that there's a certain degree of candor and respect and honesty that they have to maintain to allow that team
Mhm.
to work through the dysfunctional issues. But also, I'm sure you know this, you need to know when to step
Mhm.
in because there are some
Yeah.
things that the team can work out themselves. But when it gets to the point of high tension of, people, I'm not going to work with Rich anymore, or
Mhm.
I don't like, the way they look or that. And you
Yeah.
actually hear, then you got to step and say, folks, come on,
Yeah.
we're human beings here. We don't have to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and I'm just smiling because, well, one, I've got small kids, but some of the things I've heard my children say are things that I've heard in collecting data and working with employees and organizations, because there are times it's become so personal.
It
We
does.
are overwhelmed. We might be out of the scope of our position, unclear on our roles and responsibilities, and that doesn't set anyone up to do their best work.
Right. Exactly. And a lot of times that team dysfunction, you can boil it back down again to let's just review roles, responsibilities, authorities. Let's see who's good at what here and make sure that we're all deployed for the right things at the right times, at the right places. And above all, let's understand that we're a team. And if we're going to be a team here, and now that we've worked through this dysfunction, let's learn from the dysfunction so that it doesn't come back. And if we sense more dysfunction, we're at least smart enough to say, I'm feeling this. I don't know if you folks are, but
Mhm.
can I at least get this off my chest to make sure it's just not.
Yeah, exactly. And so my next question, and I imagine this is something that you deal with quite a bit in your work, is that when a project falls behind schedule, there tends to be this natural reaction to just communicate more and this urgency. But sometimes that becomes more noise. So how do you coach the leaders you work with to pivot to better communication instead of just more or urgent communication?
And that's the key versus more or urgent. When there usually are issues, as you know, leadership usually wants to get updates as often as possible in certain format. This is what I want to know. I was involved
Mhm.
in a project, General Electric, where we were trying to displace Corian countertops with a polyester material. And we had a beautiful product. I mean, it looked beautiful like Corian. The problem is it stained easily grape juice, orange juice, tomato juice, and you had to use steel wool
Mhm.
to get it off. And And it got to the point where we were not truthful with ourselves at the leadership level. They really wanted this. This was a pet project of the divisional leader. We had to get to the point where we had to bring everyone together and just say, look, this is not going to work. This is not going to displace Quarian. We just have to kill the project. And as painful as that was, we were able to get everybody to agree to that. But I think the point is, when you pivot like that, it's got to be a mutual decision. It can't be thrown down your throat by management. But what management started out with was, every day I want to call at 5:00, what's going on down there? What's going on in Mount Vernon, Indiana? I got to know this. So every day at 5:00, the team got on and said, well, it's chemically impossible. It's technically impossible. There's no chemical on the God's earth that we can put in there to stop that from happening.
Yep.
But what it evolved into, to get to the point of to kill it, it went from being what I call a very militaristic type, like, how can we help? What do you need? What, can you get from a vendor? They started to become more supportive and consultative. And that's what you really need in those situations.
Yeah.
I don't need you barking at me like a Marine DI. I need you to support. Understand, support, have some empathy, support.
Yeah. And then this next question is a nice piggyback to that. I'm wondering, you do a lot of work in manufacturing and technology, so you work with a lot of technically savvy project leads. So I'm wondering, how do you kind of coach them to translate what they're experiencing and certainly that risk planning into a narrative that helps to set the C-suite up to act before a crisis hits?
And that's a very good question, because risk planning needs to be done up front. It doesn't need to be done on the fly, because a risk becomes an issue once it's in your living room. I coach team leads that what you want to do when you're planning, you want to do a risk register of some sort. You want to be able to look at your known and unknown risks, because they do exist. You want to know, most importantly, what will trigger them, because you want to keep your eye on the trigger more than you want to keep your eye on the risk. Once you understand what the triggers are, then if that trigger gets pulled, what's the response? Who will own that response? It's not just, someone's got to own that response. Someone's got to implement that response. Someone's got to monitor it for its effectiveness to make sure there's no secondary risks.
Yeah.
So you need to get that down into a risk register. And then, as you're planning, when you're trying to get the plan approved by your leadership, whether you do an Agile waterfall, they now have an idea of what you have your eyes on. And in that risk register, you're going to point out, I may need you, Mr. or Mrs. Leader, on this particular risk, because it's over our pay grade, it's over what the team is authorized to do. But at least now you've sensitized the upper echelon as to all the risks that could become issues. So they're not surprised when you call it out, or they're ready to help. They understand the role. That's
I love
how I
that.
get them to think about that up front, not down the road.
Right. So insightful, because I think so many, I used to work in crisis communication, emergency preparedness when I was doing my PhD, and so many folks are like, that won't happen. We hope this won't happen. We do not know it will not. But I love that too, when you're identifying triggers, because you're right, so many folks just keep their eyes only on the risk, and then we're already reactive. And then having those conversations ahead of time, like you're saying, then we're not blindsiding anyone.
Yeah. And one of the things I see in risk planning is a lot of companies will have a little matrix. Well, what's the probability of the risk in percentage? And what will that risk cost me in dollar volume? I go,
Yeah.
boom, that's a big one. A one is a small one. That's the way you want to be thinking, because if you're just doing this based on what you think the financial impact will be, you could be looking at the wrong risks and risk triggers.
Yeah, exactly. So let's continue that idea of kind of flagging things early. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what is a communication shift that a leader can take to empower their team so that they're comfortable saying, "Hey, Rich, just want you to be aware of this," rather than being fearful, hiding it until it escalates or hoping it won't escalate?
I think if you really want to have an empowered team with skin in the game, that's not afraid to fail and fail fast as long as it doesn't hurt the company and the client. You need to empower that team. You can't just, I can't come to you and give you a full blown project management plan and say, Dr. O, please go run this plan with your team, because you and the team have no skin in the game. And if it fails, you say, well, Rich, this was your plan. It wasn't our plan. We would have done it this way. Well, that's all after the fact. So what I tell leaders is, if you really want to have a truly communicative, empowered, and team that shows ownership, don't micromanage them, empower them to do the planning. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to abdicate yourself and walk away from that. Sure, you're going to have your eyes on that. But if you like the plan, if you feel the plan is well thought out and doable and will benefit the project and when it's delivered, then let the team do that. Because if you give them that skin in the game, they don't want to get their skin cut or burned. If they see
Yeah.
problems, they're going to be talking to you every day,
Yep.
real times, for your help. And that's the best thing I think any leader can do for a team, is say, I trust you, I
Mm-hmm.
will help you, but you're the captains, and I want you
Yeah.
to do what you think is right.
Yeah, right. And that's why we hire these people, right? And then we can
Right.
empower them and help to build engagement, things that we know help to stave off turnover. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. So I know a lot of your work, you build sustainable project management processes, and that's so important. So it can, these systems outlive individual projects. So I'm wondering, how are some of the ways that a leader can ensure the communication habits they're learning during a recovery, for example, stay in the organizational DNA for, projects going forward?
Yep. I'm a firm believer in lessons learned, but using lessons learned as you learn them for continuous improvement. So when I do project recovery, when we learn about the root cause and the root cause corrective actions, we make sure that those are recorded for the team's sake, so they understand how to implement that root cause corrective action, to monitor, to control it, and then to close it out with, okay, so what was the result of that? Because you constantly want to be improving the skill set of your people, and you want them to be to improve the skill set. So I believe in lessons learned, not at the end of a project, but while a project is going on. And
Mm,
yes, when a project ends, you should
yeah.
sit down at the end in some type of retrospective and say, overall, what did we learn? Because someday there will be a similar project to this long after we're gone, that we should have in a repository somewhere, that someone can go to and see all the things that we did right, did wrong, and what we learned. So the mistakes and issues are not repeated. So it all comes down to me is continuous
Hmm.
improvement through continuous learning.
Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful message. That idea that we are learning as we go, because then we're also, we talked before about kind of fostering a environment where people feel comfortable flagging these potential issues.
Yes.
Because I think so many times organizations, because of urgency and deadlines, just feel like the train is on the track and we'll revisit it at the next station. And it doesn't have to be that way.
No, 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 not at
Yep.
all. I grew up in the automotive business, uh, GE Automotive, and we would go to the reviews with the big car companies, and there were usually quarterly reviews. We would report out what we're doing for a particular
Yeah.
vehicle. And one of the lessons I learned is by the time you give them the information at the quarterly review, there's always someone on the other side that's not happy with that. I don't agree with that. Well, that was a big lesson for me, which is
Yeah.
I'm now going to communicate once I see something to that. And we would do that at GE. Say, we're
Hmm.
not going to wait now for a quarter to talk to you. We're going to let you know as soon as we know, and then you're going to advise accordingly. But I think if you have that DNA of continuous improvement and continuous learning and
Mm-hmm.
applying what you learn moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to be that much more efficient and effective as a person in a project. But the project's going to come in on budget, on time, with all the deliverables,
Yep.
with a satisfied client.
Exactly. Yep. And a better developed team.
Yeah, it's all about people
Mm-hmm.
development. I mean, projects are done by people for
Yeah.
people.
Yep. Exactly. So, Rich, I have two final questions for you, and these go hand in hand. And this is the way that we end all episodes of the Communicative Leader. So, the first part is for our titled leaders. What is the advice, the challenge, the tip you want to leave them? And then the second part of the question are employees across all ranks in industry. What is it that you want to leave them with?
Well, I would say to the leaders that will listen to our conversation here today, one, when you have the need for a project, number one, engage. Number two, empower. Number three, make sure it is scoped properly up front, because if it's not scoped properly up front, no matter what's planned beyond that, is not going to work. And to allow your people to fail and fail fast, as long as it doesn't hurt your customer or your
Yep.
company, because there's learning in that. And if you will empower your people, there's skin in the game, there's ownership, and you will be a fulfilled leader because your people trust you and you trust them. So that's very important. The other thing I would say to anyone listening today that is in the project management world is let us
Mm-hmm.
all remember that project management is done by people for people, and it is not rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1/3 common sense. You know what you want to do. You know why you want to do it. You know who should benefit and why they will benefit. That's your common sense. Your logic is your plan. Make
Okay.
sure that you put the due diligence into your plan and include the things we talked about today, specifically risk. Do not overlook risk management, but make sure that the plan is solid. Have everybody sign off on the scope plan, on the project management plan. That's a signatory that we're all in this together. Our skin's in the
Mm-hmm.
game. And
Yep.
lastly, it's discipline. And that's where things break
Mm-hmm.
down, especially in communication. Okay. Play the plan. Do not deviate from the plan unless it's so structurally wrong you have to. But if you plan it
Mm-hmm.
right, it shouldn't be. If you follow that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 formula, you are Six Sigma assured that you're going to have a successful project.
Yeah. And I love when we break it down and help people to see this is within your reach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Rich, I have a follow-up for you if that's okay. You talked about failing and failing fast. Kind of talk to me about what that looks like, what it is, what it's not.
Okay. Failing fast. I'll give you an example. And this is a funny example.
Mhm.
Back in the late 80s at General Electric, we went to Coca-Cola and we said, we would like to make a plastic Coca-Cola can. They got very excited because at the time, aluminum was very expensive and plastics weren't as expensive. So we went into this with polycarbonate, this beautiful program. We built a tool for Coca-Cola. We did all the development work for Coca-Cola. But there was this one small problem. There are elements called low molecular weight oligomers, for your technical chemical people out there, that would leach out of polycarbonate. The old baby bottle, if you saw the baby, right? Well,
Mhm.
that didn't bode well for Coca-Cola, for people that like Coca-Cola. But we failed, and we failed fast. We knew within 3
Mm.
months this was not going to work, not because you couldn't make a plastic pop can, but
Yep.
because what was leaching out of the plastic, because it's inherent within the plastic, would
Mhm.
negatively affect the
Mhm.
Coca-Cola, which could potentially affect what happens when we ingest it. But we
Yep.
failed, and we failed fast. We didn't waste a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's really helpful. I really like that because there's so much we've been talking about continuous development and lessons learned. And there's a point when you recognize, nope, this doesn't make sense. And it's okay to walk away from this rather than, because what I think happens so often, what I see happen often, are people are like, this is my pet project. I'm going to continue to try and keep this alive as long as I can. And that's a much harder failure, much more expensive failure in so many
Exactly.
ways.
And as I tell teams I coach, there's no shame in failure. There's learning in failure. And there's strength in failure if you're strong enough to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that it has to stay in your chest, because there's somebody who knows something you don't know that may be able to get
Mm-hmm.
you beyond that failure.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And what an important message for people to hear, especially when we're asking them to innovate, to take risks.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Rich, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. I've really learned a lot. I have all of these notes I've taken from our conversation. I know that I'll return to this conversation, and I know it'll be really helpful for our listeners as well.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.